Well, we're supposed to talk about longevity, but I think everybody in this room has longevity in more ways than one. And I think, Deborah, if we could have your genes, then we wouldn't need what Victor and I are going to talk about.
That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. So good afternoon. I'm Mehmood Khan. I have the privilege of being CEO of Hevolution Foundation, which we'll touch on. But most of all for today, I'm the immediate past chairman of the U.S. Council, and it's really a pleasure to see a lot of friends, colleagues, and hear some really great discussions. Let me just introduce my friend, Dr. Victor Dzau, who is currently the president of the National Academy of Medicine. In the interest of getting on with our topic, I won't go through his esteemed career. You have our bios in this, but I will mention one thing about Victor, which is some of you know I was vice chairman of PepsiCo. The reason I was at PepsiCo is because Victor recruited me. So we go back. That tells you how much I listen to what he tells me to do, including major career changes. So Victor, let me kick off. Some of the audience may know that under your leadership, starting about 3 years ago, in fact, you and I had a dinner here in Washington when you broached the idea of having a global roadmap on aging and longevity and kicking that work off. That was the second time I did what he was telling me I should do. And my question to start is, why did we need a roadmap? Or why do we need a roadmap? And why now?
I think, first of all, Mehmood, thank you for that nice introduction. You gave me way too much credit for your brilliant career. And thank you, Deborah, very much for being here. I think first issue is the recognition that we're living much longer, right? The world is living much longer, and it's a good thing. If you look at the stats, we've always almost doubled our life expectancy in about 100 years or so. So it wasn't that long ago when people think about living to age 35 and you're gone, age 50. But now I think look at this room and look at many of us, I think many of us can expect to live a ripe old age. So that's the key issue, right? Because the demographics of our whole population is changing, and we need to recognize that. If you look at fertility, it's actually going down globally and in the United States. What's amazing for me is to look at this curve that shows you age 65 going this way, age less than 5 going that way. In 2020, the two lines intersect, which means going forward, we are going to have more people who are older than actually younger. And that's the truth. Now, as I said, it's a good thing. People think, well, getting older is frail, dependence. But just look at this room and look at many people that we know. Getting older, if you're healthy, right? If you're healthy, it's going to be just fantastic for all the reasons we can talk about later. So I think really what compelled us to do the roadmap at the National Academy is the fact that we don't talk about this too much. If you look at the agenda, health agenda in this country or anywhere else, we think about many issues, but very few talk about what are we going to do with people who are getting older. So the roadmap is to create a pathway forward to say, what are the issues we need to consider? What are the policy issues? What are the kind of science technology issues, research that can really enable healthy longevity, not healthy aging, healthy longevity. Living longer, I don't think our goal should be living long forever, but we want to live healthier. So the idea of longevity actually is not only about when you're over 65, it's about the entire life course, how to be healthy, and consequently, when you get older, you have longevity. And we can talk about all those benefits, but that's the purpose. And thank you, by the way, you're one of the commissioners that help us think through this issue in terms of what would we recommend, right, roadmaps. But the idea was to recommend to US government, global government, private sector, and everybody. It's an all-of-society approach. How do we prepare for an older population?
So I think for those of you who are interested and haven't seen, there's been a very nice and elegant summary paper that you and Linda recently published, I think only about a week or two ago. I'd highly recommend looking at it. I mean, Jim knows all of this data usually backwards from Gallup, and we can look at this as a challenge, right? People are going to get old. Not too long ago, we were hearing about, the planet can't sustain this growing population. Now we're starting to see this stabilize. The demographics are changing, but there's an opportunity side to this.
Absolutely, right.
It's going to mean that as leaders, we've been hearing about labor, innovation, but we have to rethink education and lifelong education. We have to rethink the labor force and jobs. We have to rethink transportation, housing, healthcare will come to, the financial model, banking, insurance. All of these things are going to be impacted by this very significant global change in demographics in the world's population. And for us, it's an opportunity rethinking how can the US lead the world in helping in that innovation. And I always differentiate between leading and winning. This is something that's going to benefit every country, every society, and every human being. We're all aging. And we can actually pool, which brings me to how do we fund all of this innovation, pool the best ideas from around the world and bring that leadership role of convening those best minds and lift ourselves, but also continue our history of democratizing the innovations the US has.
Right.
And the Academy, under your leadership, recently rolled this out in Singapore.
Yeah.
Would you share with us some thoughts on where are the biggest gaps
Sure.
in our knowledge?
Well, let's talk about the dividend first. We have a thing called longevity dividend, the gains you have as you age, because most people see this as a burden. But in fact, if you're healthy, the gains are substantial, right? People with a lot more experience, people are able to be productive, people can bring and train the next generation. And of course, the silver economy is huge if you look at the buying power of this population. So there's a lot of gains in this, we call dividend, right? So I think the question you're going to say is, how do we get there is the question. Right? So I'll report things about 4 or 5 domains that we need to address. First, of course, is the social domain. We do know that the social environment of as you get older is really important, right? Because we saw this, look at COVID, when older people were feeling isolated, they're a lot more at risk. And if you look at all the studies, they'll tell you that it's really important to have social structure, a purpose in life, and that's why many of us are working, right? Feeling really that we're contributing, and to have the kind of support that you need. So that's a key issue. Second is the physical environment. Actually, where you live, how you live is critically important, and we can come back to that, how to design the right living conditions. But I think many studies show that if you're living, again, in isolation, it's really not as good as nowhere as multi-generational living, being able to interact with each other. The physical environment that can get you around without feeling impairment, and the socialization, the physical environment, the social activities. Work is critically important. Actually, if you ask many people now, who are 65 or so, people are ready to continue to work, and of course there are no retirement age in many workplaces these days. We can come back to our retirement. But the idea of the opportunity to continue to produce is really important. So the workplace, getting away from ageism, discrimination, helping people to retrain, to contribute, is only good for...
Victor, you might want to mention there's more than paid work, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Really goes into that.
That's part of dividend. I mean, I was telling people I love going to my grandchildren's kindergarten or school to read to them, to spend time. But there are many people who, in fact, volunteer their time. And then volunteerism is so important for both sides, right? So that's what you mean.
I never, as a kindergartner, had the president of the National Academy come read to me. So that's not an experience I can relate to.
You know, the one I got the most tweet likes, I mean, I tweet, you know, you get, 30 people, 60 people. I got 100 tweets when I actually showed one at Chinese New Year when I went to my grandson's school and read them and show them what Chinese New Year is all about. So yeah, I think this volunteerism is really important. Lots of data to show how important it is for the health, etc. Then of course there is the health systems, right? Good primary care, long-term care, and many others. And finally, science and technology, which is what I want to ask you about and tell people about Hevolution, because we're seeing that science technology is the wave of the future. There's so much of this discussion, this meeting is about that. I mean, you imagine in science technology, just to make a point, we can come back to more discussion. When you think about that technology that can help you to get better care of yourself, right? The pill boxes and reminders and the emergency pendants, you name it, but also technology that enable you to be more mobile, to be able to get around, and technology that can really assist you in so many ways in decisions, etc. I think those are phenomenal opportunities in the future. People think about an iPhone. I mean, I think almost everybody uses an iPhone now with apps that can help people, especially the older adults, think how to navigate. But I think the whole issue of science technology creates a pathway for the future, particularly when you think about the kind of things you're interested in. That biology aging is now amazingly exciting, that people understand what causes cells to age, tissue to age, and senescent cells actually also release substance that can make you actually more inflammation. And then also now people can even think about ways which you can change the genetic coding transiently to turn your cells from older cells to younger cells. It's quite amazing. So I can see the whole opportunity out there. So I think if you look at all these enablers and we start attacking them, I think this is going to be great for society and great for everybody.
So let me respond. Look, in our report, one of the things with the terms we use is the whole of society approach, right?
Absolutely.
This is not a single sector. If we think about the tech sector, then the human-machine interface, understanding the role of sensors in enabling functionality as we age and retaining that functionality is a huge opportunity. And while we think about defense and semiconductors and all the rest of it, there are 75 million boomers in this country that are very soon, all of them are going to have turned 65. Many sitting in this room. That's 20% of the country, at least. And by the way, it's an inverted pyramid. And so in some countries, we look to the future, Scandinavia, Japan, 40% of the population is already over 65. And if you think that that's a developed country challenge, China, India are going to have the largest number of elderly people on the planet. So it's global. That's the business innovation opportunity as we think about serving the world in a purpose that I can't think of any controversy in terms of who's going to say we shouldn't be helping us age better. Now, let's turn to the biology. We know, and you've just mentioned, all the exciting pathways that we've started to actually understand now why molecules and cells and now eventually tissues, how they age, why they age. And as we understand that, the opportunity now comes to invest in bringing all that knowledge together, say, how do you apply that to impact the life course of a human being? This is not about living longer. Whatever your life expectancy is, one of the tragedies of modern medicine and public health has been we're living about 30 years longer over the last 50 years or so, but 20 of that 30 years has come at the price of disease. And of course, Medicare can't be sustained. NHS in the UK can't be sustained. So one approach is, how do we change the environment? In all the ways. The other is, how do we understand the biology? And instead of treating the diseases that result from the aging, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, which is right, okay, you have dementia, now what can I do about it? It's a bit like saying, wait until you've had a stroke and I'll treat your blood pressure. Okay? Or do we come at it and say, we can actually affect this biology? And for the NIST people, by the way, I was having a discussion with Kyoki earlier, since he's my vice chair on VCAT at NIST, which means I do what he tells me, is that we don't even know how to measure some of these things. So it's going to take metrologists, all of that. But the opportunity, if we can impact and slow down the aging process to impact health positively, David Scott published this recently, as you know, is several $1 trillion of GDP impact, okay? Just in the United States on an annual basis. So how can we come at it? Well, of course, we have to fund this science. The gap in the funding that we've identified at Hevolution Foundation is there's a lot of research investment going on diseases of aging. Probably 90% of the NIH's budget is focused there. But very little on the prevention of those diseases around the aging process. And on the other hand, the pharmaceutical industry and the venture capital have a path, because of the regulatory environment, clearly defines how do you bring treatments, not just drugs, devices, etc., to the market to treat the consequences, and a huge gap in the middle for 3 reasons. 1, the regulatory path needs to be clarified as the science gets clarified, which impacts policy. The second is we need to be able to provide capital that is willing to take both risks on the technology as well as wait longer for the output. And the last panel just talked about it. Venture capital in our current environment typically has a 3 to 5 year focus. Well, we're not going to be able to do that until we bridge that. And this comes into the true public-private partnership, which is where does government come in, where does philanthropy come in, and where does industry come in. So Hevolution, we launched our organization with the mandate of we'll invest capital and we'll invest in the science. 100% of our profits from our capital go back to the foundation. We're a nonprofit. We're the for-profit entity that funds the innovation. But because we're not limited just in calculating ROIC and time course, our approach is we're willing to take bets that will take longer than traditional venture capital would.
So, I think what you're saying, let me first take a step back and say, why is this council interested? Because it is about competitiveness, right? If you think about workforce, we have a real problem in workforce if everybody retires and there's not enough younger people keeping this up, right? So health longevity is critically important. We talk about the dividend in terms of productivity, and you talk about silver economy, but I think let's talk about the research piece. I think what Mehmood said is the model in which we fund research is really not meant for looking down the road in the future. First of all, disease-oriented versus prevention, but more so that it really looks at one disease at a time, whereas I think if you look at health longevity, you got to look at the whole system, right? And so therefore, we need to bring many different sciences into the issue. Third is NIH funding is usually risk adverse, right? Everybody knows that. You know, until you kind of apply and ask for something, you already have done half the experiment because of feasibility. So having foundations, others to take risk in bold ideas is really important. As a matter of fact, you know that we created this global competition that actually provides seed money, this National Academy now. We have like 50 some countries participating. We have sponsors from about 12 different countries that simply provides seed money for bold ideas. Don't need any preliminary data. And so we had, for now 3 years, each year 1,500 applications globally. We fund about 150, and then they get to the next stage where they can get initially 50,000, but on to 1 million or more to get the field activated. You doing that through Hevolution, we doing that through this kind of global competition. But perhaps more importantly, the idea you say, slow down aging. Actually, scientifically is now able, you can reverse aging. right? This is the partial reprogramming
Yep.
approach. So I think the science is now getting there. Question is, are we getting a critical mass? Are we getting able to move forward with clinical application? This is what Mehmood is saying. The regulatory environment looks at disease and outcomes. But if you look at health, how do you measure prevention? It takes a long time, right? So it's very funded very differently. So we need to change this. But research will also allow us to say, if I look at you and I can measure this, I can tell you biologically how you are, not just chronologically. And that, in fact, by looking at this, if I do any kind of intervention, whatever, physical activities, drugs, etc., I can measure that marker to say whether, in fact, your biological aging has changed. That could be an endpoint for FDA approval, right? Because this is how, otherwise, as you said, most of the dollars in National Institute of Aging is on Alzheimer's.
About 2/3.
Yeah. And so it's really late and trying to prove this. But if we're able to do it early, taking you and me, being able to do whatever intervention that is and demonstrate we can actually slow down aging and be healthier, the measurements are more difficult.
By the way, I've known Victor more than 20 years. He looked the same 20 years ago. So
And
whatever
so
it
do you.
was.
So does he.
Let me ask, I just want to mention a point which has been very important to us at Hevolution. Let's say we get to the point where we can actually tell you your biological age. Now the positives of that is, you know what it is, and if we could track it and show you that you can bring your biological age, and there is data and evidence to suggest that. Studies such as if you take up exercise, stop smoking, etc., have shown that your age will reverse at a biological. So that is proof of concept that there are things that can be done. There are interesting, which we won't get into, but I just want to raise the question. We need to also, as a society, understand who should have access to that data. Who should be able to know what your biological age is? And how do you use that data? There's a lot of we're really at the cutting edge of not only biology, but a lot of the social implications in biology that we've really not had to cross in the past, which is why, again, in our report, it's about whole of society coming together and understanding the positives and the challenges. The question it then leads to is, as all of this happens, the first scare we always get is, well, the planet can't afford to have all these people living forever, and how am I as a young person going to get a job, right? And where do I fill these jobs? The reality of it is, and you heard earlier today, in the US today, there's 1 million vacant jobs just in the STEM area, okay? Secondly, we know that the demand will continue in the foreseeable future of creating jobs will outstrip the supply. And since the birth rate has fallen in many countries to below the replacement rate, there is going to be a choice of either we don't fill those jobs, or we figure out a way to keep our workforce productive for longer. But for the educators in this room, it does raise the question of when do you interface with a student? Our current model, you go to school, in your 20s you're done, you go to work, you could build your career, you retire. That's about to change, if you think about, because you may be a physical worker one part of your life, a manual worker, whatever, and you may switch careers, for which you'll need to be re-educated.
Yeah.
If we can keep you productive and healthy. How do you see, and I know we're short of time, how do you see different countries and different sectors of countries actually collaborating together? Because this is not about competing with each other, right? One thing we all know is we age also relative to the environment in which we age.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think I'm afraid to say we are behind in this country in looking at this issue. Japan, of course, with the aging population, has this high in the agenda. But Singapore, you talk about all of society approach. They have an all of society approach. The entire government with different ministries have actually come together to address this. So you can imagine that they have housing, designing housing to multi-generational housing, that Singapore have a lot of high-rise, so the older adults live in lower level, the younger families live in high level, but in fact they have social interactions, physical space. They design in such a way that smart enabled homes, which you can use all the technology to help the older people to navigate, phenomenal, right? Health, right? And of course, as you say, lifelong learning, workplace, and the private sector. It is an all-of-society approach if you really want to address this issue. And other countries are more ahead of us. Because, you know, as I closely look at, well, let's talk about this. We launched a report in Singapore. The Deputy Prime Minister came, he's the heir apparent to the Prime Minister, opened the meeting and stayed. And I'm told by John Wong, when he went back, he called the cabinet and said, you guys got to read this report. This is really important. And so they're taking this very seriously. Here in this country, if you really want to know who is the Assistant Secretary of Aging, what Senate Committee on Aging, they're not that transparent. And they don't really command that high level of attention that we should be seeing. So you and I have a lot of work to do. All of us have a lot of work to do. Workplace, right? I think many of you are employers, you know, and I think that workplace is so important to remove the idea of ageism, to create a workplace with more flexibility, to have the older adults help you design the workplace, to give them, as you say, retraining, right? Actually, all the data look at whether retaining older employees displace younger. The data totally said does not whatsoever. If anything, multi-generational, and all of you know that, multi-generational interaction is really important for both at home and workplace.
In fact, as you know, BMW did a very elegant study. They showed productivity in their production line of multi-generation workers was higher than either younger or older. And so there is that collaboration and a very different social dynamic in a multi-generational team than there is of the same generation. With lots of reasons for it. In closing, let me, hopefully we've been able to just touch the surface on 3 points. Number one, this is important personally. This is important for every country. And other than environmental issues, if we think about the global demographic change and the impact it's going to have in terms of healthcare costs, pandemic preparedness, any aspect we just talked about, we can either wait for this to continue down the tsunami that's happening, or we can turn that 180 degrees and think about the economic opportunity, the social opportunity, the health opportunity, the innovation opportunity, globally and for the US as a leader. There isn't another industry, if I was to call this an industry, because it's not one, it's every sector, there isn't a bigger opportunity than I think what we just laid out for you, and the numbers are very, very clear. So my Sputnik moment and I am old enough to remember Sputnik, for everybody in this room is, as leaders of your organizations, you really go back and reflect and say, if we all came together, what would we do different, given what we've just said? And what businesses, remember, one thing that Jim Clifton said is we don't create companies. What companies and businesses would we either change or create as a result of the realization of the opportunity, which could become a challenge if we don't take it? Thank you very much. Victor, thank you.